dive into today's episode, I just want to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. It helps us grow, reach more amazing learners like you, and keep bringing you fresh and fun content every week. So don't forget, like, subscribe, and let's keep this journey going strong. Hello, bright minds and curious learners, and a very warm welcome back to Idiom Insights. I'm Emma, your dedicated guide, always excited to explore the wonderfully colorful world of English idioms and help you make sense of phrases that don't quite take the direct route to meaning. So thrilled you're joining us again today.
And I'm Jack, your enthusiastic co-host and linguistic navigator. I'm here to help steer you through the sometimes choppy waters of idiomatic expressions with a splash of insight and, hopefully, a little bit of fun along the way. It's always a genuinely good time to be back here on Idiom Insights.
It really is a pleasure, Jack. And today's episode of Idiom Insights is packed with some really useful and frequently used idioms that touch upon various aspects of facing difficulties, handling disagreements, experiencing consequences, and making wise decisions. Understanding these will certainly make your English sound much more natural and fluent.
A very practical selection indeed. And to give you a clear idea of what we'll be dissecting and discussing in detail today on Idiom Insights, here are the 4 idioms we've lined up for you. We'll start with a bitter pill to swallow, which describes something unpleasant or difficult that you have to accept. Then we'll tackle a storm in a teacup, a great phrase for describing an unnecessary fuss over something small. Following that, we'll look at a taste of your own medicine, which is all about experiencing the same negative treatment you've given others. And finally, we'll wrap up with don't put all your eggs in one basket, a very practical piece of advice about not risking everything on a single thing.
That gives our listeners a clear and interesting preview of the idiomatic journey we'll be taking together over the next little while. 4 very different but equally valuable expressions.
They certainly are. And before we dive headfirst into explaining that first idiom and breaking down its meaning, we wanted to take a quick moment to connect with you, our fantastic audience. If you are finding these episodes of Idiom Insights genuinely helpful and enjoyable for your English learning journey, please consider showing us your support by subscribing or following our podcast on whatever platform you are using right now.
Your subscription is a wonderful way to ensure you never miss a future episode packed with more useful idioms and explanations. It also helps us reach more people who are on a similar path of learning English. And if you feel like going the extra mile, leaving a like or a quick rating is also incredibly helpful and sincerely appreciated. It's a little gesture that makes a big difference in helping others discover Idiom Insights. Thank you so much for your support.
All right, Emma, are you ready to confront our first idiom, even if it sounds a little unappetizing?
I believe I am, Jack. Let's see what makes this pill so difficult to swallow. Excellent. Our very first idiom for today on Idiom Insights, as we previewed, is a bitter pill to swallow.
A bitter pill to swallow. This idiom is quite straightforward in its imagery, isn't it? Think about taking medicine that tastes really, truly awful. Something that is difficult and unpleasant to get down. And that's precisely what this idiom means. An unpleasant or difficult truth, fact, or situation that you have to accept, even though it is upsetting, disappointing, or very hard to deal with. It's something unwelcome that you must come to terms with.
That's a perfect connection to the literal meaning, Jack. It describes a piece of bad news, a difficult consequence, or an undesirable reality that you have to somehow manage to accept and live with, despite how unpleasant or painful it is. It's not something you want to deal with, but you have no choice. You have to metaphorically swallow it, just like you would a bitter medicine, even if it makes you wince.
Exactly. It's often used to describe having to accept defeat, acknowledge a mistake you made, or come to terms with an unfortunate outcome that you desperately wished hadn't happened. For example, losing a job unexpectedly can be described as a bitter pill to swallow. You didn't want it to happen. It's upsetting and difficult, but you have to accept the reality of the situation and move forward.
or perhaps receiving some tough, negative feedback on something you worked really hard on. If the criticism is harsh or unexpected, even if it's constructive, it can still be a bitter pill to swallow. It's hard to hear that your best effort wasn't good enough, and accepting that feedback, while potentially beneficial in the long run, is unpleasant in the moment.
It definitely implies a sense of difficulty in acceptance. The truth of the situation is hard to process because it's disappointing, unfair, or goes against what you hoped for. Finding out that a deal you were certain would happen has fallen through at the last minute would certainly be a bitter pill to swallow for anyone involved. All that effort, all that anticipation suddenly coming to nothing is a harsh reality to accept.
The origin, as you touched on, is simple and direct. The unpleasant experience of swallowing medicine that tastes bad. The bitterness is unpleasant, but you endure it because it's necessary for your health, for example. In the idiom, the bitter pill is the unpleasant truth or situation, and swallowing it is the act of accepting it, difficult as that acceptance may be.
It powerfully communicates the feeling of having to accept something you really don't want to accept because it's disappointing or painful. It's not just mild inconvenience, it's something genuinely difficult to come to terms with. The news that a beloved company is closing down could be a bitter pill to swallow for its employees and the local community.
It emphasizes the necessity of acceptance, even when it's hard. You can't ignore the bitter taste. You have to swallow it and deal with it. It's a very evocative phrase for describing those unwelcome moments in life where reality is harsh and unavoidable.
Let's hear how Mia and Mark use a bitter pill to swallow in their conversation. They're talking about someone having to accept some difficult news related to their career.
Hey Mark, did you manage to catch up with David after he got the news about the promotion? I heard someone else from a different department got it instead.
Oh yeah, I spoke to him briefly yesterday. He seemed pretty down about it, honestly. He'd worked really hard on his application and thought he had a really strong chance this time around.
I can imagine. He'd been talking about that specific promotion for months, how it was exactly the next step he wanted to take in his career here at the company.
Exactly. So getting that email saying he wasn't selected, after getting his hopes up and putting in all that effort, he said it was a truly bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just disappointing, it was a really hard reality for him to accept right now, especially after feeling so optimistic about it.
Oh, poor David. That really is tough news to receive when you're genuinely hoping for something specific like that. It sounds like it hit him pretty hard.
Yeah, it did. A very bitter pill indeed.
That dialogue paints a clear picture. David's disappointment and difficulty in accepting the news that he didn't get the promotion he really wanted is described perfectly as a bitter pill to swallow. Mia and Mark's conversation naturally sets up his anticipation and effort, highlighting why the rejection was so hard for him to accept.
It perfectly captures that moment of having to face an unwelcome reality that is painful and disappointing. For David, after all his hopes and efforts, the rejection was exactly a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just a small disappointment, it was a significant setback that was hard for him to come to terms with immediately.
So listeners, what has been a bitter pill to swallow for you recently? Perhaps some unexpected bad news, a plan that fell through, or a difficult truth you had to accept. Share your sentences using a bitter pill to swallow in the comments section below this episode of Idiom Insights. Tell us about something that was hard for you to accept.
It's a powerful idiom for those difficult moments. All right, let's move on to our second idiom, which is about making a big deal out of something small. Our second idiom today on Idiom Insights is a storm in a teacup.
A storm in a teacup. This is a wonderful, very British-sounding idiom. Although it's used widely now, it means a situation where people are getting extremely angry, excited, worried, or making a huge fuss about something that is actually very minor, insignificant, or not important at all. It's a lot of unnecessary commotion over a trivial matter.
That's a brilliant description, Emma. The image is wonderfully contrasting, isn't it? A storm is a huge, powerful, sometimes destructive weather event, but a teacup is a very small, fragile container for a hot drink. So imagining a huge storm happening inside a tiny teacup perfectly illustrates the idea of a huge reaction happening within a tiny, insignificant situation. The scale is completely mismatched.
Exactly. It's about overreacting dramatically to something small. You might hear about a minor disagreement at work that blows up into a huge office argument, with people shouting and complaining bitterly. If the original issue was something like who used the last coffee filters, someone might comment afterwards, "Honestly, all that shouting and anger over something so silly, it was just a storm in a teacup."
It really highlights the unnecessary nature of the conflict or fuss. The problem itself is small, but the reaction to it is disproportionately large and dramatic. It's often used with a tone of dismissal, suggesting that the people involved are making a big deal out of nothing important. My neighbors had a huge argument last night about where to park the second car. It sounded awful, but really it was just a storm in a teacup compared to some of the serious problems people face.
It can describe situations in families, workplaces, online communities, or even in politics, where minor issues are escalated into major controversies. There was a big debate on social media about the correct way to pronounce a certain word. People were getting genuinely angry and insulting each other over it. It was such a storm in a teacup, wasn't it?
The origin is believed to be Scottish. Originally, a storm in a cream bowl, which later evolved to a storm in a teacup as tea drinking became more common. Regardless of the exact container, the core idea remains the same: a huge disturbance confined to a tiny space, representing a lot of fuss over something insignificant.
It's a very useful phrase for injecting a sense of perspective into a situation, pointing out that the drama or conflict is unwarranted given the trivial nature of the issue at hand. It's like saying, "Why are people getting so worked up about this? It's really not important."
It perfectly conveys that idea of unnecessary excitement or anger about something minor. You see it happen all the time in everyday life. Small misunderstandings or minor annoyances suddenly escalating into huge arguments or major sources of stress because people overreact. That's a storm in a teacup.
Let's listen to Mia and Mark discussing a recent minor incident at work that caused a surprisingly large amount of drama. See if you can hear them use the idiom, "a storm in a teacup."
Oh my goodness, Mark, you wouldn't believe the drama that happened in the break room this morning. It was absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, what happened now, Mia? Did someone accidentally break the coffee machine again?
Worse than that, almost. Apparently, someone used the wrong mug by mistake. You know, the one with the slightly chipped handle that Sarah from accounting is weirdly possessive about.
The chipped mug? Seriously? What kind of drama did that cause?
Well, Sarah discovered it, and she went completely ballistic. She started loudly complaining to everyone in the break room, sending angry emails, and even went to HR saying someone needed to be disciplined for touching her personal mug without permission. It was absolutely unbelievable how much fuss she made.
Wow, all that over a mug? A mug with a chip, no less. That really sounds like a classic example of a storm in a teacup. So much drama and anger over something so completely unimportant and trivial.
Exactly. It was the definition of a storm in a teacup. Nobody else even cared about the mug, but she turned it into a huge office crisis. It was exhausting just watching it unfold.
That's a fantastic and very relatable example from Mia and Mark. Sarah's extreme reaction, complaining loudly, sending angry emails, involving HR, to something as minor as someone using her chipped mug, is perfectly described as a storm in a teacup. The size of the storm, her reaction, was completely out of proportion to the size of the teacup, the minor incident of the mug.
It clearly shows how much fuss was created over something truly insignificant. Mia and Mark's dialogue highlights the disproportionate reaction, making the idiom "a storm in a teacup" the perfect fit for describing the situation. It's a great way to dismiss an overblown conflict.
So, listeners, have you witnessed or perhaps even been involved in a storm in a teacup? Think about a time when someone made a huge fuss over something very minor. Share your sentences using "a storm in a teacup" in the comments section below this episode of Idiom Insights. Tell us about a trivial incident that caused unnecessary drama.
It's a great idiom for adding a bit of perspective and maybe a touch of humor to an overblown situation. All right, let's move on to our third idiom for today. This one is all about experiencing consequences. Our third idiom on Idiom Insights is a taste of your own medicine.
A taste of your own medicine. This idiom is all about poetic justice, or karma, if you believe in that. It means that someone is treated in the same unpleasant or unfair way that they have treated other people. They experience the same kind of negative treatment that they themselves have dished out.
That's right, Jack. It implies that someone who has been mean, unfair, critical, or has behaved badly towards others is now on the receiving end of that exact same kind of negative behavior or consequences. The idea is that they are getting a dose of the negative treatment they previously dispensed to others, like a doctor giving a patient medicine. But in this case, the medicine is the unpleasant experience they inflicted on others.
Exactly. It often carries a sense of satisfaction or justification, like the person deserves this negative experience because they caused similar experiences for others. If someone is constantly criticizing everyone else's work in a harsh and unhelpful way, and then one day they receive equally harsh and unhelpful criticism about their own work, you might say they are getting a taste of their own medicine.
It's about experiencing the effects of your own negative actions or attitudes from the perspective of the person you originally affected. If someone is always playing practical jokes on their colleagues, some of which are not very funny and actually quite annoying, and then one day they themselves are the victim of a particularly annoying practical joke, you could say they got a taste of their own medicine. They now know how it feels to be on the receiving end.
It strongly suggests that the consequence is a direct result of the person's previous behavior. It's not just general bad luck, it's a mirror reflection of how they treated others. The company CEO was known for being ruthless and firing employees without any warning or severance pay. When he was suddenly fired himself with no warning or compensation, people felt he was finally getting a taste of his own medicine.
It's a vivid idiom for describing a situation where the tables are turned and the person who was causing unpleasantness for others now experiences that same unpleasantness themselves. It can be used in a serious context or in a more lighthearted way, depending on the situation, but the core meaning of experiencing the same negative treatment you gave out remains constant.
It really highlights that sense of symmetrical consequence. You did this negative thing to others and now someone is doing it back to you. Or you are experiencing a similar negative outcome as a direct result.
Let's hear Mia and Mark use a taste of your own medicine in their conversation. They're talking about someone who wasn't very considerate and is now experiencing something similar.
Remember how David from the marketing team used to constantly send out those huge email attachments to the entire company, like enormous video files, without ever checking the file size? Or if people actually needed them, it would always clog up everyone's inbox.
Oh yes, I absolutely remember that, Mia. It was so annoying. My email would take ages to load sometimes because of his giant files. And you couldn't even reply to him and tell him to stop without adding even more to the email chain. He never seemed to care how it affected everyone else.
Exactly. Well, I heard he was complaining yesterday because his own company email account is suddenly completely full, and he can't receive any new messages at all because someone else in a different department has started sending out massive reports every day that are filling up his inbox.
No way. Seriously? Haha. Wow, it sounds like David is finally getting a taste of his own medicine, doesn't it? He knows now how frustrating it is to have your inbox clogged by enormous, unnecessary attachments because it's happening to him.
He really is. Maybe now he'll understand why everyone else was so annoyed and will stop doing it himself.
That's a perfect and frankly quite satisfying example. David, who used to annoy everyone by sending huge email attachments, is now experiencing the same problem himself because someone is doing it to him. He is definitely getting a taste of his own medicine, experiencing the negative consequence he previously inflicted on others.
It perfectly illustrates how someone's own inconsiderate behavior can eventually lead to them experiencing similar negative effects. Mia and Mark's dialogue clearly sets up David's past actions and the current situation, making the idiom's application very clear.
So, listeners, have you ever witnessed someone getting a taste of their own medicine? Or perhaps you've even experienced it yourself? Share your sentences using a taste of your own medicine in the comments section below. This episode of Idiom Insights Tell us about a time when someone experienced the consequences of their own negative behavior.
It's an idiom that often brings a sense of closure or justice. All right, Jack, let's move on to our fourth and final idiom for today's episode of Idiom Insights. This one is a very practical piece of advice. Our fourth and final idiom is, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. This is such a classic and sensible piece of advice, framed as an idiom. It means you should not risk everything you have on a single plan of action, a single investment, a single opportunity, or a single source of something important. The idea is to spread your resources or your efforts across multiple options so that if one fails, you don't lose everything.
That's exactly the point, Jack. The origin is very straightforward and visual. Imagine you're carrying a basket full of eggs, perhaps to sell at the market. If you carry all of them in just one basket, and you accidentally stumble or drop that single basket, all the eggs will break and you will lose everything you were carrying. However, if you divide the eggs among several different baskets, and you drop just one, you will only lose the eggs in that particular basket, preserving the others.
It's a simple, powerful metaphor for the importance of diversification and not over-relying on a single thing. You use this idiom to advise caution against concentrating all your resources, hopes, or efforts in one place. When you're applying for jobs, it's usually best not to just apply for one dream job. You should apply for several suitable positions. Don't put all your eggs in one basket because if that one job doesn't work out, you'll have nothing else lined up.
It applies to many different areas of life, particularly finances and investments. Financial advisors constantly tell people, don't put all your eggs in one basket. They mean you shouldn't invest all your money in just one stock, one type of asset, or one company. If that single investment performs poorly or fails, you could lose a significant amount or even all of your money. By diversifying your investments across different stocks, bonds, or property, you reduce the overall risk.
It's about mitigating risk by having backup options or multiple sources. If you are a small business owner who relies on just one major customer for almost all of your income, you are putting all your eggs in one basket. If that one customer decides to stop doing business with you, your entire business could be in serious trouble. It would be wiser to have several different customers to reduce that risk.
It's a cautionary piece of advice, urging prudence and a more diversified approach. It encourages thinking about what could go wrong and having alternative plans or sources of support ready. It's the opposite of taking a huge, concentrated gamble where you could lose everything in one go.
It emphasizes the potential catastrophic consequences of total reliance on a single entity, plan, or investment. It's about spreading out the risk to protect yourself from total failure.
Let's hear how Mia and Mark use "don't put all your eggs in one basket" in their conversation. They're talking about someone's plan for the future that seems a bit risky because it relies on just one thing.
I was chatting with David again earlier about his plans after not getting that promotion we talked about. He seems to have decided that if he can't move up here at the company, he's just going to quit entirely and try to start his own business, selling his handmade furniture online.
Oh, really? Just quit his job completely with nothing else certain? That sounds like a pretty big leap, doesn't it? Starting your own business is incredibly difficult and it can take a long time before you make any real money from it.
Exactly what I thought. I mean, I admire his passion for the furniture making, but relying solely on getting enough online sales right from the start seems incredibly risky to me. What if it takes longer than he expects to build up customers?
Yeah, that makes me a little worried for him. It sounds like he might be putting all his eggs in one basket by quitting his stable job entirely and relying only on the new, unproven business to succeed.
That's exactly the phrase that came to my mind too, Mark. He should maybe try building the business slowly on the side first while keeping his job, or at least have some significant savings or backup plans. It seems very risky to rely on just that one income source from day one.
Definitely. It's generally wise advice in life. Try not to rely completely on just one thing working out perfectly.
That's a perfect and very natural use of the idiom. Mia and Mark correctly identify that David's plan, quitting his job and relying solely on his new online business, is risky because he is putting all his eggs in one basket. He is risking his financial stability by relying completely on one new, unproven venture succeeding immediately.
It perfectly illustrates the idiom's core meaning, concentrating all your resources or hopes into one single potentially fragile option, and highlighting the risk of losing everything if that one option fails. Mia and Mark's discussion about potential alternatives makes their use of the idiom feel very realistic.
It really does. And that brings us to the end of our 4 idioms for today on Idiom Insights. We've explored facing difficult truths, overreacting to minor issues, experiencing deserved consequences, and the wisdom of diversification.
We have covered quite a lot of ground today. In this episode of Idiom Insights, we learned about an unpleasant reality that is hard to accept being a bitter pill to swallow. A lot of unnecessary fuss over something small being a storm in a teacup, experiencing the same negative treatment you gave others being a taste of your own medicine, and the advice to not risk everything on one thing being, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
These are all incredibly useful idioms that you will definitely hear and can use in many different situations in English. Don't be afraid to try incorporating them into your own vocabulary. The more you use them, the more they will become a natural part of your English. Start practicing them today.
Absolutely. Give them a try. And if you enjoyed this episode of Idiom Insights and found it helpful for your English learning, please remember to give us a like or a quick rating on your platform. Your support helps us immensely and allows more learners to discover our podcast.
And to make absolutely sure you don't miss out on any future episodes where we'll explore even more fascinating and useful English idioms, please be sure to subscribe or follow Idiom Insights wherever you are listening right now.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We genuinely appreciate your dedication to learning English and hope you found our episode insightful and enjoyable.
It truly was a pleasure. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and we'll be back soon with more Idiom Insights.
Until next time, keep learning, keep smiling, and maybe don't carry too many eggs in one basket. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.